I'm putting myself up for public office, mate. There's nothing off limits.
All right. Do you want me to hit you with a wild question to begin with?
Yeah, sure.
You got Jesus, a woman, and a baby all hanging off the edge of a cliff. Who do you save first?
Yeah, that's one of those impossible questions that one way or the other I'm going to burn with the answer for, right?
I'll push all of them. You know what I mean? They'll figure it out.
Yeah. Nah, like, you have to go to baby, naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look after the next generation.
Yeah, 100%. Like, what's life about if it's not about the next generation? I honestly, one of my motivations in being involved in politics is I want to see our country better when we sort of bequeath it to the next generation than it is now.
Yep.
And I think our generation are starting to step up to the plate, whether it's in business or it's in politics or it's in community organisations. People our age are starting to take leadership roles and shape the country.
Wait, how old are you?
36.
True.
Yeah. So I've packed a bit in to that time.
Yeah.
But, 36.
So when did the aspiration for a political leadership position sort of come to you? Because, 36 is reasonably young for the trade.
Yeah, it is. I think you've got to be a little bit unwell to want to enter politics in the first place.
You want to be the guy on the pedestal, you know?
Yeah, that's right. You know, inviting the pot shots, come at me. But I actually never joined the Liberal Party thinking of entering politics per se.
Okay.
I actually grew up in the shipping industry, so I'm a Bunbury boy originally.
Okay.
And when we were sort of getting towards the end of high school, I'd done quite well. And so, you know, I went to Bunbury Grammar, all the usual conversations, you know, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? So, you know, one mate's going to be a doctor, one mate's going to be a lawyer, one mate's going to be an engineer, and then they look at me and, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to sea.
Yeah,
so, you know, I'd grown up sailing and as a sea scout and messing around in boats. And I guess it became a natural progression to turn something that had been a childhood hobby and a passion into a vocation.
Yep.
And I do this, I go way off piece and I'll come back to the actual question. And so I actually went on the Lewin, the tall ship Lewin. So some 45,000 West Australians have been through that. Did a 10-day voyage from Albany to Freo. And on the last day of that, they hand the ship over to the trainees and they do it in a really cool way. So the captain at dinner time the night before basically says, right, attention everyone, tomorrow we've got to get to Fremantle Harbour and we're not going to do anything. So you guys need to sort out your own crew from the captain down.
Wow.
And unless something is unsafe, we're not going to intervene.
Yep.
And so it was actually one of the first elections that I was involved in, and put myself forward to be the captain and was lucky enough to get elected. Yeah. So, I was the captain of the Lewin for a day, if you like, and that sparked in me a real interest in shipping.
Yep.
So finished up year 12. I did TEE, or ATAR as it is now, and, you know, got great marks. So I think the school were a little bit disappointed that, you know, I wasn't one of the doctors or the lawyers. But at that point, I hated the idea of a desk job, and I thought this is a great, you know, way to marry a passion and the opportunity to see the world, right?
Yep.
So off I go to uni in Tassie. The Australian Maritime College is a faculty of UTAS.
Okay.
So 17, found myself in Launceston, a long way away from mum, and, you know, away I went. Originally, I got a job with BP Shipping, so was working all over the world. And by all over the world, I mean, followed an icebreaker over the top of Norway into a very northern Russian port called Vivino, which no one would know. But we stopped at Murmansk, which was obviously a famous World War II port.
Right.
Picked up this icebreaker, off we go in convoy. And as we were coming into the berth at Vivino, this pack of Arctic wolves actually ran across the ice next to the ship. And I thought, right, I have literally seen everything now. I'd never thought I'd see that. But the Northern Lights, we went up and down the east coast of the States, Northwest Europe, through the Arab Gulf, Southeast Asia, of course. So I had this great job, right? And then I heard about how much more money you could make working in the Australian oil and gas industry.
Okay.
So
I think we all have that moment.
Yeah, that's right.
Wait, how much do they earn fly in, fly out?
Yeah.
Oh, I got to go.
I'm going to get me some of that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the difference was, I was then a junior officer. And so I, as a junior officer, could make more than a captain was being paid at BP by coming back to Australia.
Okay.
So it was, a no-brainer. And it was at that point that I discovered this little thing called the MUA, the Maritime Union of Australia.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd never come across unionism before.
Yeah.
And I have to say that at the outset, my encounters were poor. And through the rest of my shipping career, they increasingly became borderline criminal.
Yeah.
So I was looking at...
Sorry, is this the performance of the union or the job itself?
Oh, the union and the influence it has in the workplace. So the thuggery, the bullying, the intimidation, the harassment.
Even in transport, I was a truck driver between being a business owner and a business owner, and it was like day one, brother, you're in the union.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know what the union is.
Why would I do that?
You're about to find out what it is. You're going to pay us, and if there's ever a problem, we're going to look after you. And it's like, hang on, what problem am I going to have? I've never had a problem in another job before that I need a group of bloody bandits to look after me.
Exactly.
So the union thing is always kind of, and it still does. Like I've been in the union and pulled out of the union, much to the disliking of the union members. Shit, like they'll make everyone in the room raise their hand if they're not a union member. How's that okay in a normal workplace? You know what I mean? Or everybody here, raise your hand if you're not part of this club. Oh,
but they're telling people that they're standing up for a safe workplace,
right?
Where it's going to be inclusive for everyone.
Yeah,
so the hypocrisy of it, I think, really didn't sit well. And at the same time, though, so this is going back to the Rudd Gillard years. So these guys are in professional meetings calling me all sorts of things that I probably can't repeat here.
Yep.
And, threatening you with all sorts of stuff in this safe and inclusive workplace, and then bragging about the influence that the union was having in Canberra. Oh, we're going to tell, And I thought, you know what, this is bullshit. I'm not going to stand for that. The one thing that I thought, well, I can do something. I can join the Liberal Party. So I paid my $25 and I signed up to the Liberal Party. And it was with no more intent than that I joined.
Yep.
And then I guess, like any organisation, if you're interested and you become more and more involved, it becomes like this vortex. It just sucks you in.
And all of a sudden you're
exactly
you're taking on more roles. And so, what is this? You paid $25 in your Liberal. What is this? What's that?
So, I mean, at its essence, the Liberal Party is a grassroots organisation. It's built on people just like me having an interest in, how they see the government of Australia, and choosing to join. Yeah. So the membership fee's gone up a bit in the meantime. It's $50 a year now.
Yeah. Do you get like a pin or what?
No, you get nothing.
Oh,
you
cool.
get the newsletter, mate, in your email inbox, and that is it.
You got to tell people I'm a Liberal.
Well, you can.
Yeah,
Most people don't.
Yeah.
Sex, religion, and politics are things you can't talk about at a dinner party, right?
Yeah. Only Facebook.
Yeah. People get behind a keyboard, it all changes.
Yeah.
But, I mean, equally, the world then becomes your oyster. So you can then have a direct say in who your local representative is. So we have a pre-selection process to choose our candidates.
Yep.
And every Liberal Party member who lives in that particular seat has a vote in who that person is.
Oh, okay.
So you get people who sign up, they pay their money, and they never come to a meeting, they never engage meaningfully at all.
Yep.
And then you get tragics like me who turn up to every meeting, go to every event.
Yeah, read all the bloody notes.
Read all the stuff, and then slowly become, I guess, more and more inclined to say, hey, well, I'd like to take on that job.
Yeah.
And my first job was vice president of the Bunbury branch, so
cool.
A job that has absolutely no duties attached to it, which appealed at the time.
Yeah.
And that was my sort of first step in becoming more and more involved in the party.
Yep. Cool. Okay. And did you get a badge when you were a vice president or no?
You still don't get a badge.
Still no badge.
No, if you paid $20, you got a name badge.
You still got to pay.
You still got to pay.
What do the Jews cover?
Welcome to politics, mate. You got to put your hand in your pocket for everything.
Okay. Now I understand this is an extremely rookie question that I'm asking. So you're like buying your way into the club, like not you, but the way this works, you buy your way into the club for the ability to vote on who your leaders are going to be in that club. Those leaders are going to go forward, go against other parties for the top dog position. And then obviously once you're in that position, you can then be part of the decision-making process for the greater area. That's the gist?
Bang on.
Beautiful. All right. So please continue. I cut you off you found out about the MUA. Oh, sorry. And then your part after that was doing something about it, not appreciating what the MUA stood for.
Exactly. So, I mean, that got me started on the road, I guess, to ultimately ending up sitting here talking to you, right?
Yep.
And it's been a pretty varied journey along the way. Politics is a contact sport. You get the odd blood lip. So, you know, I've had my fair share of losses as well as a few wins.
Yeah.
But I think the rules of the game are known to everyone when you sign up. Like I said, you're putting yourself up for public office, in fact, the highest office in the country to serve in our federal parliament. You've got to expect that people are going to put you through the ringer.
Yeah, it's a scary thing. I got voted for, I was a nominee for Citizen of the Year a couple of years ago, and I had a friend who was I think he is still a standing council member for somewhere. Anyway, he knows everyone. So he's not making me, but
it's Bunbury.
Yeah,
it's a village.
Yeah. Everyone knows everyone. He's getting me to shake everyone's hand, and he's like, yeah, Jake's going to run for council, and kind of put the words in everyone's mouth that I was going to be doing this thing. And I'm like, brother, I'm covered in tattoos, and I hate following the rules. What are you doing? You know? But that turned into, I mean, I ran with it. I mean, you know, kind of like you said before, you put yourself in this situation and you find yourself taking on roles that maybe you wouldn't have before, but because you're here, you're like, well, we'll see what it looks and feels like. And I sat down with a lot of people, drank a lot of coffee with a lot of new names and new faces, and sort of like just tried to figure out what it was all about. Like, what do you guys actually do? Like, what is being a council member? What does it entail? And I learnt that there's kind of this might be a bit of a crazy thing to say on camera behind a microphone, but there's people making decisions, and then there's people who are allowing those decisions to be made. Seems to be the rich people make the decisions, and then the people in politics allow them to be made, right? And I feel like in that moment, I sort of made a decision that if I really, because I too, like you, I am so invested in the next generation. I'm very invested in where Bunbury is going, and that's why I'm building these communities. That's why I'm really finding my purpose and my place, and being able to like activate the things around me that I find are valuable. And I thought, if that is my mission, then the mission looks like getting really fucking rich first, so I can help be part of the decision-making process. Because at the end of the day, it's got to be money or power. And if you don't have either, nothing's going to happen. If you got both, you might be able to make some influence. So I think the biggest thing is, like, the biggest question I always have for people who are putting themselves, especially in the position that you're running for in politics, is how's a decision made to be put yourself in such a line of fire? But also, and I talked about this with Sue as well, how do you navigate these powerful people coming to you and being like, we want this to happen, Ben? You know?
I take a slightly different view in that you're right. I think there are two distinct groups of people. There are those that are making decisions and those that allow them to happen. Mm-hmm. The reality is that very few people get involved in the decision-making process, and the overwhelming number of Aussies just allow them to be made.
For sure.
And so it's not so much about the rich and the powerful, it's more about who turns up.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you look at local government elections, are a great example. You're talking about 20 to 25% turnout at local government elections.
Crazy,
so more than 3 in 4 people don't give enough of a shit about how their local government runs to bother voting for their representatives.
Right.
Now, they're equally outraged when their rates bill comes through and it's 15% higher. And they go, well, how the hell did this happen?
Yeah, what happened?
You know? Who's making these sorts of crazy decisions?
Yeah.
It must be the rich people that have orchestrated it. Well, not really, you know.
Yeah.
And so I think we actually owe it to ourselves on the whole to better educate our peers, our friends, our colleagues, our neighbours about these sorts of civic basics.
Yep.
And if you don't vote, then you don't really have much of a cause to complain, I don't think.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a really long-winded way of saying I decided at some point along the way to be someone that turned up. And it's given me an amazing inside run, if you like, because there are so few people who do.
Yep.
You sort of find that decisions, we see people making decisions in public life and you wonder, God, how the hell do you become someone like that?
Yeah.
And the reality is that they're just a normal person, and all they're bringing to the table really is their values, their life experience, and not much more.
Yeah.
That's it, though. But you don't do any training in how to become a minister or a prime minister or a mayor, or you get put forward by your peers, and then it's up to you to make the rest of it up as you go. So sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. But so, for instance, and I'll go all over the shop, but at one point I did briefly serve in the Australian Senate. So Matthias Cormann, who was quite a prominent West Australian senator and was then the Minister for Finance in the federal government, announced he was retiring from the Senate and putting himself forward to go and serve in the OECD in Paris.
Okay.
And he actually went on like a worldwide election, and he won that election to become the Secretary General.
Yep.
So it was the first Australian in history that's ever led one of the more significant multilateral organisations in the world. So it's a pretty big deal for Australia.
Yeah, for sure.
But anyway, that created a vacancy, which under our constitution is actually filled by that political party.
Yep.
So rather than forcing every Western Australian to go out and vote again for a senator, because let's face it, most West Aussies don't even know what the Senate is, we actually just allow our parties to fill that spot until the next election.
Okay.
So I was lucky enough to be put forward by the Liberal Party. So off I go to Canberra, right? I had literally never set foot in Parliament House until the day that I was sworn in.
Yeah, wow.
So I walked in through
What's that moment like, though? That must be crazy.
Honestly, it's bewildering.
Yeah.
So I go through the front door and I literally sort of said to the security desk, hi, I'm the new senator, but where do I go?
Yeah, where do I go?
And I was like, come this way, here's your office, here's the pens, and then like half an hour later, raise your right hand. I just couldn't believe how quickly and how surreal that was.
Yeah.
But that first week in Canberra, I have to say, got more surreal because the PM sent me an invitation to come around for dinner.
Yep.
And so here I am. So a few weeks ago, I'm working at Woodside because that process from Matthias, I guess, announcing his retirement and the Liberal Party conducting its little internal election to turning up in Canberra was about 6 weeks.
Wow.
So my life just turned upside down in 6 weeks.
And you're living in Canberra for this position?
No,
Okay.
just travelling. So I was living and working in Perth at the time for Woodside. And so I'm head down, bum up at Woodside. 6 weeks later, I'm in Parliament House.
Getting invited to dinner with the Prime
I opened up
Minister.
this envelope, and it was a really fancy envelope.
Have you still got it, by the way?
I still got it.
Yeah,
I
of
still got
course.
it. You don't throw something like that out, right? And so you open up this with a wax seal, you open up and there's this beautiful card, inviting Senator Ben, the Prime Minister requests the pleasure of your company, I think was the wording. It was beautifully done.
Amazing.
And so, of course, there's only one answer to
I'm going to use
that.
that for my invitations later on as well.
Exactly. So I was go to the lodge. So again, it's like wandering around, sort of trying not to stare and gawp and, you're trying to be cool and, this happens all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was a couple of us there. So this was a dinner for about 6 people.
Yep.
And we were waiting for the PM in the lounge room at the lodge, which is just like any other lounge room. There's a couple of couches and a TV, and again, you don't think about it in these terms, but the Prime Minister is just a person.
Yeah.
So they sit on the couch and they watch TV.
I was going to say, can you believe he wants 15 grand for this Bronco? Tell him he's dreaming.
Exactly right.
That's what I'm picturing.
Anyway, so the PM breezes in after whatever he'd been doing, and there are staff there, and he said, "Oh God, I'd love a beer."
Yeah.
And so he gets a beer in his hand, and he was like, "Anyway, so Ben, you're the new guy, and tell me a bit about yourself, blah blah. Come on through, guys. We'll go and sit down for dinner." And he said, "You sit next to me."
Yeah.
So in my first couple of days in Canberra, I'm now sitting next to the Prime Minister having dinner. And he asked me what I thought was right and wrong about our policy on relations with China.
Wow.
And it flashed through my mind, mate, if you'd seen me 6 weeks ago at my desk in Woodside, you wouldn't be asking me what I thought about our foreign policy with a very significant trading partner and a potential strategic challenger.
Yep.
But that's what public life's about. Yep. And the decisions that are made by those Aussies who turn up, put themselves forward, and then make the best of it.
Interesting. Interesting. I like how the snake ate its tail there. That was beautiful. Yeah.
We get there eventually.
I think that's the Trump thing, isn't it?
He does it as well.
Yeah. Start telling a story about something, you're like, brother, what are you doing?
Where are you going?
Yeah.
Tricky's not to get lost over there in the wilderness.
Yeah, you know? 45 minutes later, and you're like, and that's how I eventually learned how to tie my shoes. What was the question? You know? No, I think I think there's definitely a diffusion between, because I think to kind of highlight a couple of points there, you're right. The majority of people have no idea how the system works. And the big thing that I learned when I was going through this process of like, do I want to be a counsellor? What is a counsellor? What's the responsibility? How much time does it take? What's the difference between me and people who are already counsellors? And you realise like nothing. They're people, right? They're people. Most of the time they're people who just decided like, oh, there's this position and it's sort of available. And there's sort of a relationship there between counsellors and business owners, because the thing I find about, especially, you know, like in the position that I'm in, where I just decided to start a business from nothing as a person who before that had a bit of business experience but typically was an employee. You kind of go like, oh, if I just figure out a way to make money and it works enough to pay myself, then there's no ceiling on that. I can just keep going and going and going and going and maybe be a millionaire, billionaire, whatever you want. And then you start going, well, there's no difference between me and now the top of the pile, like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, right?
Bang on, mate.
In the same context, you go, okay, these people that are in these positions of making decisions and being a hand that votes and can sway the way my community is developed or the landscape of my community is shaped, it kind of falls onto these votes, these hands, these people, these humans that are just like me. And understanding that, okay, that's possible for me to go down that route, and I am covered in tattoos and I hate following rules, but I can still be that person. If I wanted to, I can be that person. Then you realize that that world exists with or without you anyway. So there's a couple of points. The education between like how a normal person gets from being the normal person, living their life, working a job, trying to survive, to someone who raises their hand and makes a decision. There's also the diffusion of information between that position and these people over here, where it's you're trying to, in that position of being a counsellor, say to a person who just lives in Kerry Park, in Usher, in Marlston Hill in South Bunbury, like, hey, what's your opinion, you know? And also, what's your information that you're getting, you know? So many people you talk to them about these hot topic informations, homelessness, the windmills, all the things that we kind of hit with Sue Chapman. A lot of people have distorted ideas about what's going on because they get all their information from social media, which is coming from other people who have no idea what's going on.
But they have a platform now and they're not afraid to use it, half-baked or not. And I think that that's one of the great challenges with politics at all levels is you're looking to represent a community. Now, whether that's a suburb on council, like a couple of suburbs in a ward on council, or indeed your electorate in the federal parliament, you're looking to distill a community's needs, aspirations, and values, and input that into some sort of policy-making process. Inevitably, that means that there are going to be some people that agree with you on a particular issue and some people that disagree with you. And there's also some tension because you've put yourself into a leadership role. In my mind, that doesn't mean just reflecting the majority will of the people in that particular constituency. Sometimes you actually need to make tough decisions that are in a broader interest. Mm-hmm. So if you put yourself in the federal parliament, for instance, I think you actually have to be prepared to say to your own community, I'm actually going to go this way on this issue because Australia needs that.
Yep.
So there's an education piece, I think. If you're going to step out, you've got to take that community with you. But like there's 120,000 voters in Forrest, for instance, and they're all busy, you know, whether it's working to pay the mortgage, get the kids off to school, or it's in their own businesses, or it's doing whatever they're doing, you've got to try and engage with those people and compete with their normal life for that little bit of attention so that you can explain something typically quite complex in a way that's easy for them to understand.
Yeah.
And it's the value of, direct conversations. You can get to the bottom of where they might have misunderstood something or not been aware of something. But when you're broadcasting to massive numbers of people, you don't have that ability to interrogate. So it gets tough.
Yeah, I think it's like as a rising sort of I give myself this label as a rising social leader, which is really sort of my mission to get to a position where I can do some sort of effective leadership where it's, even if it's just helping people find their own consciousness, asking questions that helps them ask themselves. I find it really sometimes intimidating because I'll sometimes throw myself under the bus in search of these great conversations with interesting people. Like I did it just recently and made some really, in reflection, I went the wrong way about it, talking about the woke agenda and talking about the homelessness situation and how I perceive it. I think the scary part about that is that when you are these social leaders, which obviously you are already in that position and looking to be a greater social leader, you do have to take these difficult standpoints and you have to find a position of education and being able to speak the language of the average person, the constituent, whatever you want to call them, and being able to communicate like, hey, I know this sucks, but if you have a moment, let me get to a point that might resonate with you, because I'm not making this decision because I'm evil.
Yeah, bang on.
I'm not saying this thing because I'm a bad guy. In fact, I'm working really fucking hard to be a good guy for you, you know?
And just going back to it, what makes you say you went about that the wrong way, though? That's an interesting comment.
I think things are so complex that sometimes they need more than, like, this is a great platform to be able to really flesh out an idea and like have a discussion. But I think some topics are so big that they need more than that. They need to like sit, marinate, come back, unpack. And also, I think like with any situation, I need to be able to learn, and my audience needs to be able to learn and come back and say, you know what, like I am right now, maybe didn't do that the best way possible. And the next time I go about it, it's like, you know, here's a little bit more empathy, here's a little bit more understanding, here's a little bit more depth, you know. And I think sometimes with those situations, like the best way to really understand someone isn't to sit from afar and judge them. It's to have a conversation with them, be like, why the fuck are you so weird? You know, like, why are you the way you are? Because my monkey brain doesn't understand it. And that makes me angry, because instead of wanting to learn, I'd rather just stick to what I know and defend it.
Yeah.
You know, and in those situations, it's like in that particular conversation, I 100% in some aspects just was like, sit down, little boy, here's what's going on.
And there's a temptation, I think, in a way that politics generally has sort of always been conducted, I think. It's adversarial in nature. We line up in tribes and there's those that are for and those that are against a particular issue. And so if you disagree with what's being put forward, I think it's important to remember that ultimately they are people that are coming to the table because they want to see a better Australia. So we're arguing about the how, not really the why.
Right.
And that's useful because, for instance, when you're tackling an issue that's, you know, complex and difficult, say, you know, homelessness, for instance, we can't shy away from the fact that ultimately everyone that's coming to the table from a position of public leadership, whether it's council all the way through, they actually want to see the problem solved. So as much as it's easy to just paint someone that says something or asks a difficult question as being a bigot who, you know, just wants to, you know, toss these people to the wolves, I think it's important to actually understand that there might be something behind it where they do genuinely believe that there is a different way.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's where a lot of stuff gets lost in the noise of politics.
Yep.
And it becomes personal, whereas it shouldn't really be.
Yeah, I think there's definitely I guess, I mean, I know one thing that I do when you get asked these big questions is you kind of want to come up with a conclusive answer on the spot as well. You know what I mean? So it's like, as much as I might want to get to the bottom of this right now, I'm dealing with trying to stay afloat financially. I'm trying to be a good fiance. I'm trying to be a good son to my parents. I'm trying to be a parent one day myself. And there's all these things. It's like, then homelessness comes up. You're like, brother, I don't know, fucking this, you know? And it's not necessarily correct, but it's the correct thing for that moment, you know? And then also, I mean, if we put ourselves in these positions where people are looking at us, it's then that can be the defining moment of your career that, well, he doesn't care about homeless people. It's like, brother, that's not it, you know?
Yeah. And look, you know, I've had my fair share of those moments when you've got a microphone in front of you and you say one thing.
Yeah.
Amongst a whole bunch of other contexts.
Yeah, and that's it.
But that's it.
Yeah.
And I remember I did an interview on a national TV program.
Yep.
I won't name them. And so before we went on air, the host said to me as a coalition MP and to the Labor Party MP, listen, guys, I want to make sure this is a bit of a jazzy segment. I want a bit of backwards and forwards, okay? So all happy to dive on in and get amongst it. If it gets a bit sort of staid and boring, I'll deliberately move the question, to one of you and get it back on track.
Yeah.
All happy. Cameras rolling. And for context, this was early 2022 when the federal parliament's issues with women, and of course the Brittany Higgins case, the Grace Tame, this was all running really hot.
Okay.
And so we're having a discussion about whatever it was, and the Labor MP, who was a woman, cut me off a few times to make a point, which is fair game, right? It's what we all agreed to do.
Yep.
So she was in the middle of making an absolute meal of this particular point, and I thought, well, I've got a different view on that, and chimed on in. And she just looked directly down the barrel of the camera and said, really, this week of all weeks, you would talk over a woman.
Amazing.
And I thought, oh, no. Straight away I thought, you've got me, because that's what's going to be on tonight's news.
Yeah, of course.
And on Channel 7, 9, 10, the ABC, the SBS, it went everywhere.
Yeah.
And here I was, the misogynist coalition MP, talking over a woman in Parliament House. And I just thought that was so unfair. But, it is what it is.
I think in your words, we as you said earlier in this, we play by those rules. We know that going into this, that this is what's going to happen.
Exactly.
So how do you? I mean, I like the naive concept that it doesn't matter whatever challenge I get, I can turn it into an opportunity. Situations like that, I mean, they're not. How do you turn that into an opportunity?
It's an opportunity for growth because you got to walk through the fire a few times and learn from those experiences. So how do I not fuck it up so badly next time would probably be the first bit.
Yeah.
But also, there's an obligation, I think, to protect your staff. So, for instance, my office phone in both Perth and Canberra ran off the hook for days with, I have to say, some of the most vitriolic and abusive calls, typically
What's
from
that?
women.
Well, what's vitriolic?
What they would be saying, and so. For instance, my office manager was a lady who I'd worked with previously, and she came across with me. So she left her corporate job because she was pretty keen to be involved in what I was up to.
Yep.
And so she was being called all sorts of horrible things because she would say, well, look, I'm not going to put you through to the senator. So you're protecting that misogyny. You must be a right.
Yeah, right.
And so, but this went on for days, and like email inbox just overflowing with this, all sorts of threats and abuse, and like what the things that people will put when they're in writing when they're behind a keyboard are pretty shocking.
Yep.
So I mean, I don't want to dwell on it, but it's all part of this experience that you go, okay, so because if you have a microphone in front of you every day in the course of your job, typically at some point you're going to say something that's going to provoke a reaction.
100%.
And so one of the lessons for me was, how do I make sure that what I say and do as a parliamentarian, or now an aspiring parliamentarian, doesn't unduly impact my staff who just turn up to do their jobs.
Right. I think the thing that will cancel you has already been said.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
Like with 150-something episodes of this podcast, I better not get into politics because I've said some wild shit, dude. I mean, I don't want to go into exactly what I've done in my past, but if you want to find some stuff on the internet on me, it's there.
It's there.
It's fully there,
But I mean, I just think that, so I've been in politics briefly, I've been back out of it, and now I'm mad enough to want to go back in. And I'm going back in with a determination to actually say more.
Yeah.
Because the moment that you cease to be an office holder, you're back to being Joe Citizen again. So you can argue down the pub with your mates about, what we're doing here or there, or what this should, put the country on track over here.
Yep.
It's just shit talk at the pub.
Yeah.
Whereas when you are in office, you've actually got a platform to shape what happens in our country. And so I think, I want to go back and be even more bold about that.
Yep.
Because I think our country needs bold leadership. And we're sort of stagnating. And we're no longer a country that does stuff.
Yeah.
The word can't is everywhere.
Yeah.
You can't say that. You can't do that. You know, what happened to a sort of a country that backs people like you who are prepared to put it all on the line, take a big risk, build something, create something, employ people, maybe do well.
Yep.
Maybe become a millionaire, but also maybe lose the fucking lot.
Yeah. And every day it's definitely hanging there. It's definitely like a real reality where it's like I'm one decision away from turfing it or 1,000 decisions away from making it.
Exactly.
You know?
And I mean, I've been in small business as well, right? So I guess my sort of shipping career became like an oil and gas career, and I got promoted up through the ranks, and I'd done my MBA. And I thought I knew business because here I am. I'm running a sort of a portfolio or a department in a very big company. I've got this massive budget, P&L responsibility, and flying all over the world, doing all this cool stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, I've got business. And so a mate and I decided to start a small business and in hospitality.
Yep.
And we quickly realised within the first weeks and months that we actually didn't know very much about business at all.
Interesting.
When you can't pick up the phone and call finance and say, I've got this problem, or you can't pick up the phone and call IT and say, there is no HR, that's you.
Yeah,
you're
all
it.
Of those, yeah.
And equally, you're the one that's signing all the personal guarantees. So it's your ass on the line.
Yeah.
That gives you a different insight into what business really is.
Yeah.
And so I just think that by being bolder and by making the sorts of policy interventions that actually deliver something for those people, you're going to attract criticism, sure.
Yeah.
But we're also going to clear the way for a whole generation of Aussies to build a business.
Yeah. There's something that's kind of like keeps dwelling there. I think the first thing is I'm not attacking this person. I'm genuinely asking this to myself. Who looks directly down the camera knowing they're getting a soundbite? Like, what is that person, right? We spoke a little bit about this before we got started. The cool thing about this situation for you right now is you get to have almost like a Trump on Joe Rogan moment, right? People get to actually understand, like, well, outside of the guy on the sign, who are you? You know, like, how do you communicate? Do you someone that I can relate to? And at the end of the day, can I vote for you? And I think there's this old school way of looking at things where it's like, we've got 3 minutes to tell the country why you should vote for us. And now I'm saying, look, man, you've got as long as you can talk to tell this area why you're the guy. Yeah. Right? And I think there must be a line in the sand there where, I mean, tell me honestly, are you going for the soundbite right now?
No, well, I'm trying to do politics a little bit differently, and I think we need to do politics a little bit differently. By that, I mean we need to engage with voters in a way that circumvents that sort of bullshit. And, okay, it's really hard because people are busy, they're disengaged, they're pretty apathetic about politics generally.
Right.
In Australia, that's my judgment. But the decisions that are made in politics are really impactful on their life. So if we can use podcasts or we can use alternatives to mainstream media and social media to engage with people and explain why we're pushing a particular point, I think that's how we get the confidence that people go, you know what, the idea of putting a 1 next to that guy's name doesn't make me want to throw up in my mouth. Yeah. You know, so I can kind of see that he's genuine about trying to do the right thing for me. If we just did the business of politics the same way it has been done for the last 30, 40 years, I think we've only got ourselves to blame when voters have decreasing levels of confidence in politicians, and voters are increasingly less likely to support major parties, and they're looking for all sorts of radical alternatives. Right. And I say radical because a lot of the alternatives that are being put forward are radical.
I think they're very got the blinders onto a lot of topics and really focus on like 1, 2 or a handful of topics and like, we're going to make this change.
Yeah. With no understanding at all of what parliamentary process is and what is within the realms of the possible. I think it's actually disingenuous. Like, it is a deliberate deception to tell people that we're going to do this when in reality you aren't able to do that unless you can conjure enough votes on both the floor of the House of Representatives and the Senate. We have a bicameral system. with checks and balances, and it's deliberately hard to make or change laws in Australia.
Right.
And so where people say, well, these particular issues are running hot, or we think that we can disingenuously chip away at a particular party on these three issues, for instance,
right.
We're going to do that. We're not going to tell the country or the voters about everything else in our policy platform.
Yeah.
We're just going to say, we're going to make that up, or we're going to make a future decision depending on what our community tells us. I mean, frankly, I think that's a very poor platform.
It sounds like you're suggesting that those, like, I don't even know who you're talking about there, but that these candidates or parties, whatever they are kind of riding on the fact that the general person doesn't understand how the system works.
I think that's right.
Okay.
And I think that the major parties in Australia, there really are sort of predominantly two. You could probably broaden that to four. So the Liberal and Labor parties are the parties of government.
Yep.
Obviously, Liberals and Nationals form coalitions. The Greens will overwhelmingly support the Labor Party every day of the week. And that's sort of like the major four parties in Australia, if you like. And then you get into the minors. If you want to join a major party, you need to accept there are trade-offs in that, because you are basically saying, I'm going to join a party that has a brand built on certain values.
Yep.
And for instance, for me, the Liberal Party's embrace of freedom, the idea of reward for effort, the idea of family being a cornerstone of our society, the idea that a strong defence force is important to a strong nation, they're the sorts of things that resonate with me, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I joined the Liberal Party, because I thought, yeah, they're the party for me. Standing up to unions and that sort of thing is a direct reflection of freedom of association and freedom of speech.
Right.
So, you know, I saw in the value, I was like, yes, that's what I'm about.
That's me. Is there anything in the Liberal value set that doesn't align with you, do you feel?
There's things in there that are probably more or less important.
Okay.
To me.
Such a political answer, hey.
Yeah. Well, and I'll explain that more, because I try not to give bullshit answers.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
So when I joined the party as, you know, like a much younger guy, the Liberal Party's value statement includes a very strong emphasis on the need for a constitutional monarchy.
Okay.
So, you know, the Liberal Party's value statement basically says we're not Republicans.
Yep. And
as a youngish kind of Aussie, I didn't really get too excited about that. Subsequently, I've done a lot more research. I've thought about it much more deeply, and I do understand how a constitutional monarchy delivers very stable government.
Yep.
And that's why right now, if you ask me, are you a monarchist or a Republican? I'm a monarchist. It's not to say I could never be convinced differently, but unless the proposal on the table delivered the same checks and balances through like constitutional crises, obviously we saw the dismissal of the Whitlam government, and you know, those sorts of moments are where the rubber hits the road and you work out whether your system works or not. We've got a system now that's built on hundreds of years of experience in both England, America, and here.
Yep.
So Westminster system, as everyone colloquially calls it. So we understand how it all works and why it works. It actually doesn't really matter who the monarch in the UK is. They have no direct say in policy making here. It is Australians making the calls.
Yep.
And so that part of the value statement, I guess at the time I joined, I was like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not so much that I disagreed with it.
Yeah, there's just more things in there you resonate with more so.
Now, have there been policies of the Liberal Party that I disagree with? Absolutely. Okay. So when I first joined the party were opposed to same-sex marriage, for instance. I'm personally in favour of it. I voted for it. Yep. And ultimately, it became law in Australia.
Yep.
And I think that that's a good example of, and you know, like we host a little debate at our Bunbury branch meeting 1 month on it.
Yep.
I nailed my colours to the mast, and I wrote a submission for the Liberal Party's policy journal on why I thought, same-sex marriage wasn't going to be the end of the world.
Yep.
And that sort of stuff actually forces you to really deeply think about why.
Yeah.
And I think that it enables you to explain it to people more, but it also means that when you know what your position is on something, you know what it is.
100%.
And so, it's not. I'm not saying that there's not scope to disagree with a party. And one of the things that, this is off-piste again, that really shits me a bit about the way that the independent movement is portraying this idea that I work for you and I'll always just vote with your interests in part because I don't work for a political party. The Liberal Party has always had this policy that you can cross the floor on any issue.
Okay.
So every vote is a conscience vote for the Liberal Party and its MPs. The only constraint is if you're in cabinet. So if you're a cabinet minister and you're sitting around the table that actually makes the big calls,
you have to reflect your party.
You have to reflect that.
Yeah.
Or you resign.
Yep.
And you resign from cabinet and you go and sit on the backbench. And there are plenty of examples where, and to be honest, it typically brings down governments.
Yep.
So Malcolm
You're asking for a very human, you're asking for a very political act in a human position there, I think. And like let's build that analogy for a second. That person sitting there like, I really don't agree with this, but I have to vote the way I've got to vote. It's like, well, who are you then?
Correct.
Are you going to sit here? Or are you going to get up?
Yep.
You know?
And I think that, but this is leadership, right? Mm-hmm. And so Malcolm Turnbull was brought down as the Prime Minister because cabinet ministers looked at the direction of the government and the decisions that were being made and said, I can't be part of this.
Yep.
And so they resigned and he lost the Prime Ministership over that. That's how our system works. And that's how it should work, in my view.
Yeah.
Now, being in Parliament is like drinking from a fire hose. There is so much that goes on in that place every day.
Yep.
And so you actually can't be across every issue in the depth that you would want to be.
Yep.
Because as much as, in the morning there might be a bill dealing with biosecurity in agriculture,
yep.
And by the evening you're dealing with foreign interference in universities.
Yep.
And I mean, they're real examples. I remember that day in Canberra really well. And so it's the party system works because you get groups of MPs who are either expert in or deeply passionate about particular things.
Yep.
And it's for them to educate their party rooms and say, we think that this is the right thing for the country because, and if you're someone like me, and when that foreign interference bill came through, I hadn't sort of grown up in student politics. My university experience, if you like, was very different because it was specialist in maritime college.
Yeah,
it was,
very much so.
Not really, going and doing a BCom at Curtin like so many other of my mates or whatever.
Yep.
So I sort of depended on that experience and I went, you know what, that sounds about right. I'm happy to vote for that.
Right.
If it was something that affronted my values or if I thought the Liberal Party were betraying its values, I'm going to cross the floor. If it's something that, some random example, right? So if Peter Dutton came out and said, I'm going to back Anthony Albanese's ban on live sheep exports,
yep.
I would cross the floor. Because I'm putting myself forward to represent Forrest. We have a strong agricultural industry in this seat. We've got many retired farmers as well who live in the seat and care about the industry.
Of course.
So I'm not going to betray them on something like that.
Yep.
My party is betraying its own values. I would be betraying the people that have put me here.
Yep.
I'm crossing the floor.
Interesting. Okay. What's the go with someone doesn't have a candidate in this upcoming election? Is that correct?
Yeah, so the Labor Party haven't pre-selected a candidate yet.
Is that
it's not to say they won't.
Well, that's a wild thing to be doing right now because wouldn't you want to be building trust in that particular person this whole time?
To me, it shows an absolute disregard for this community from the Labor Party. And I'm not saying that to be a partisan hack. I'm saying every party that wants to ask people to vote for them seriously has to put a candidate in the field who's from that community and has a particular policy platform, right? Yep. Here's what I am proposing to fight for this community.
Yep.
To not put anyone in the field when you're the government of the day
feels weird.
It's really weird. and I get.
Is there a lack of people that would do that job? Or is there no one kind of what? How does that come about? Do you know, or is that like an internal thing that you wouldn't know?
I don't know what the reason is, to be honest. Even in seats that are very difficult to win, major parties often, almost always have candidates, right? Yep. So look, we contested, the State Liberal Party contested the Rockingham by-election when Mark McGowan quit.
Okay.
Now, that was the safest Labor seat in the country, not just the state.
Yep.
And yet we still put forward a candidate because we thought it was important that the people who believe in the Liberal sort of values have someone to vote for in that election.
And you can also only win a race if you're in it and running.
And sometimes funny things happen.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the landslide where if Labor hadn't had candidates in all of those seats that they won in the 2021 state election, they wouldn't have won that massive landslide. They didn't. I can't honestly believe that going into that election, they honestly thought they were going to win Nedlands. They were going to win Churchlands, blue ribbon Liberal seats on massive margins. They wouldn't have seriously expected to win, but they did. And so, I think it's pretty disingenuous of the Labor Party, being the government of Australia, not to have a candidate in the field here.
Yep.
So I've been full-time since March last year. I was pre-selected, so I stepped away from business and have literally been meeting as many people as possible, listening to what their concerns are, and getting my head around all the different projects and opportunities for the Southwest.
For sure.
And for months and months and months, the other major parties haven't put someone forward, and indeed Labor still hasn't.
We're like the 11th hour and it's still... I mean, does that give you confidence? Do you feel like you're in a really good position to be able to carry out the things that you have sort of in your...
Confidence is a word I shy away from. I'm optimistic because I think I've met so many people now and got such good feedback that they, at a personal level, they relate to what my background is and that I'm not a total dickhead. And at a sort of macro level, at the national level, they really don't like the Prime Minister and the direction that he's taking the country. So that creates an opportunity for someone like me representing the Liberal Party. So I feel pretty optimistic about that.
Yep.
But, electorates have become quite volatile. Funny things happen. I mean, polls have been notoriously dubious for like a decade now.
Yeah.
Whether it was Brexit, Trump in 2016, all the way through. And they're examples from a decade ago. You know, polls, well, look, everyone thought the US election this time was going to be really tight. And Trump won in a landslide.
Yeah.
And I think he won in a landslide because he connected with average Americans and said, I'm for you. I actually want to be for you guys. I don't want to back big business or billionaires or the big unions or, I'm going to make it easier for you.
Yep.
And I'm going to put America first. And that's what won him the election.
Do you think, who would be your sort of like, we've got to keep an eye on them party? Who do you think is your major? I mean, if Labor doesn't have a candidate, does that not mean that obviously they're kind of not in the race, I'm guessing? So who would you say is your most sort of dangerous competition in this position?
I still expect the Labor Party will put someone forward, to be honest, because I think that there's a traditional sort of thinking in politics that if you've got lower house candidates, it helps hold your Senate vote up.
Right.
And so, Labor will be pretty keen on protecting their Senate vote here in the West, and 120,000 people need to see Labor on both ballots, I think.
There'll be people who don't need a face to the name. They just say, I'm a Labor voter.
Exactly.
This is who I am.
Exactly, right. So I still expect that to happen, but they've treated us with real contempt in the process. That said, Liberal seats have been lost at the last election in a big way to TL independents. Independents.
Yep.
And so, we have a teal running in this seat. And at this point, I would say that's my main competition.
Interesting. So you spoke a little about independents claiming I forget exactly how you worded it, but it's like being real representative of the people. When it comes to these, I kind of raised some hot topic issues the other day. How do you think it's like irresponsible to reflect that sort of opinion? Like, speak to me a little about that.
One of the hot button topics, obviously, in the southwest is the Geograph Bay offshore wind proposal, right?
Correct, yep.
And I think that it's disingenuous to be talking out of both sides of your mouth and say, well, look, I understand there's some community concern and we need to do this in the right way, but there's a climate crisis or a climate catastrophe and we have to take this action, blah, blah. What are you really saying? What's your position?
Yeah. Is it good or is it bad?
I have, for months, worked through the consultation process, educated myself on the merits and the traps in offshore wind. I've looked around the world at the projects that have gone bankrupt, been cancelled, the turbine manufacturers that are making large parts of their workforces redundant because of dropping global demand for offshore wind turbines. I've listened and met with local environmentalists who are really concerned about the impact on migratory whales and seabirds.
Yep.
I've met with sports fishers and scuba divers and people who are passionate about underwater photography. There's a chap I've met who has literally mapped the seafloor of Geograph Bay as a hobby.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
What's he do in his spare time?
He goes back out there and he maps a new bit.
That's unreal.
So I've honestly, in terms of like listening to your community, I've been up and down the whole length of the coast, and on the basis of that consultation and that research, I came to the view that it was important that we fight this thing tooth and nail.
Okay.
And so I lobbied internally within the Liberal Party for that to be our position. And ultimately, Peter Dutton came and stood at the base of the Busselton Jetty and looked down the barrel of a national press pack and said, if I'm elected as the Prime Minister, we will scrap the Geograph Bay wind zone.
Wow.
You can't be clearer about this stuff, right?
So
and
it's a no. Just to be clear, it's a no.
It's a no. It is an absolute no because it fails economic, environmental and social tests.
Okay.
And to me, any major project, whether it's a road or a mine or a power proposal, it has to tick those three big boxes. Does the economics stack up? Does it, protect the environment? And does it have the support of the community? Right. I'm confident this fails all three. It's a no from me.
Yep.
And in fact, it's a no from the alternative government. And that's what I think you need to give people as a clear choice. You're asking for their vote. Be clear about what you're going to do and what you're not going to do.
Yep.
Now, I know people who are Liberal supporters and they've met me and said, I don't like your position on the wind farm.
Right.
But I'm still going to vote for you. I go, okay, why is that? Oh, because I like this, this and this and this about your policy platform. Because, we're pretty clear about what we stand for.
Yep.
And I just think that's honest. And I think that one of the reasons that people have lost a little bit of confidence in politicians is that people people have not always been directly honest with their constituents. Yeah. So that's one thing I want to do differently.
I must admit, I haven't seen any stickers of people supporting the wind farm. And my introduction to it was I got told about it a long, long time ago by a person in a reasonable position of power, and it was, this is a great thing, it's jobs, it's power, it's this, that and the other. And my kind of standpoint was like, I trust them and that's my opinion, and then you see some people drawing some very interesting cartoons of the wind farms being on Back Beach, and you're like, well, I don't think that's exactly what it looks. Okay, cool, But it is interesting to hear that because, again, I don't really know what anyone thinks about it other than there's a few loud voices with bumper stickers and Facebook pages saying that they don't like it.
Yeah.
But it does feel like something that the further we get along this whole, climate change, environmental concern path, that these things cost heaps to build, they cost heaps to maintain, they're not at all recyclable, and they also have a time frame of which they're going to become redundant. So to kind of add any sort of negative aesthetic to our beautiful coastline when those things are in consideration, it would seem that they're a bad
That's right. And I think, so you're right to be sceptical of people who have opposed the project in a hysterical way. And they have, it's real NIMBYism in a way, I don't want to look at these things. There's not really a great argument, I don't think, in and of itself.
Yep.
When you line it up with everything else as you say, yeah, sure. But it's one of the lies that people have been told in recent times by particularly the left of politics. Oh, energy from the wind and sun is free. And of course, the experience is very different to that. So offshore wind is one of the most capital intense forms of power generation, i.e. it costs shitloads to build wind turbines that are 300 metres tall in the ocean.
Yeah.
So the power that is generated has to reflect that cost of capital.
Yep.
And, you know, in the UK, for instance, every quarter they have an energy auction. The last quarter energy auction in the UK, none of the offshore wind generators came in under the government's price cap. It's expensive power when it is generated.
Wow.
So, you know, look at the impact that we're already seeing in our power prices here. Now, households have been cleverly shielded from a lot of the cost increases by the state government handing out freebies with iron ore royalties, right? So we've all got the power credits and everyone thinks, oh, isn't Premier Cook wonderful? Well, really, he's diverting money from other things and giving it back to you because the cost of power is increasing in WA.
Right.
And where it's really being felt is in business. So, for instance, I've met with a vegetable farmer at Mile Up, and that Mile Up strip next to the Forrest Highway, where sometimes you're driving along and it smells a bit like onions,
And carrots,
that produces more than 10% of the vegetables that are eaten in WA, just that little strip there.
Yep.
So it's massively important production. And their power prices went up by 50% in November.
Whoa. That's hectic.
And you can imagine how much power a veggie farmer uses to have a processing plant, big chiller rooms, cold water, washing facilities, all that sort of stuff, like really power intense stuff.
Yeah.
And so he's done all the right things, got massive solar panels on the roof, you know, done this, done that, 50% increase in his power and power prices. So where do you think that manifests? That manifests in the cost of those things being sold. So why have we got a cost of living crisis and why is food so expensive in Australia? It's because energy is becoming so expensive.
Yeah.
So at the same time we're being told, oh, all of this renewable energy is so cheap.
Yep.
Power prices are going up and when we need it, it's not there. So just last week, we actually hit the peak demand, all-time peak demand on the southwest grid at 4.5 gigawatts.
Wow.
So the previous record, by the way, was 4.2 gigawatts. So this is quite a big step up.
Yep.
Because it was during that really hot weather.
Yeah, just muggy.
Yeah, it was muggy
24/7.
and cloudy. So solar production was low during the day as it was, which meant battery levels were lower. It wasn't particularly windy. Everyone gets home around 6 p.m, fires up the aircon, fires up the oven, fires up everything else. And so demand went through the roof. And at that time, when we hit peak demand, which was between 6 and 9 p.m. on whatever weekday it was, 82% of the power that was going into the grid came from coal and gas.
Right.
So it is just bullshit to be telling Western Australians that, you know, oh, it's all going to be from wind and solar and it's going to be cheap, it's going to be reliable, because at the same time, the government is paying big industrial consumers to curtail their power.
Yep.
So the Binning Up desal plant was offline 12 times last summer at state government request because there wasn't enough power in the grid.
Right.
So we build desal plants so we've got enough water, but then we can't make enough water because we haven't got enough power because we're obsessed with renewables. Like, I'm not saying that renewable energy doesn't have a place in the grid. I think it does. And I think things like rooftop solar make a great deal of sense.
Yep.
But what I am saying is policymakers should be honest with people about how the grid works, the importance of maintaining stability, and the need to have 24/7 power or a 24/7 economy.
Yeah, I mean, we also go back to the original point of like being able to capture the attention of the person who's complaining about these things to go, hey, this is how this system works. I mean, I just learnt like 10 new things then. So I think it's an interesting topic and a collection of interesting topics that actually do affect us. And one of my questions for you really did kind of revolve around the cost of living crisis that we seem to be going through, because it's multifaceted. It's coming from every direction at the moment. And exactly like you said, it's like we get a $300 credit on our power and it's like, fucking, thank goodness. You know what I mean? I'm really starting to, as someone who lives with no ceiling over my earning ability, you know, if I get a big bill, it's like, go make more money. A lot of people don't have that. They're like, I get paid $800 a week and that's what I get paid. You know, and state goes up $1 every week and electricity goes up $20 every bill and the fuel's going up $0.01 every week. And you're just like, at what point do I just become completely, you know, like I'm now in the decision where like, oh, we're not having ice cream this week because we got to buy more water, you know?
Mate, I've met so many people in exactly that situation, And I think that's how poisonous inflation is when it runs rampant in an economy. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at the Australian example, we've had inflation running higher and longer than comparable peer economies.
Yep.
This idea that Albanese sort of puts out that we imported inflation from overseas and it's all overseas' problem, and we're just managing the best we can is nonsense, because our peer economies, if you like, in the US, the UK, Japan and others, they have managed their inflation down much more rapidly. And the reason that inflation has been held up so much higher for so much longer here is government spending. So if you look at the last quarter of job numbers, for instance, 80% of the jobs in Australia were government jobs. Now, they're not real jobs because they're not productive jobs in a private business that's creating value and therefore paying a bit of tax and helping the country grow stronger.
Yep.
They're jobs that are being paid for at the moment out of borrowed money.
Right.
And so the Albanese government's massively expanded the public service. The state governments have been spending like drunken sailors on infrastructure projects at a time that the economy was really hot.
Yeah.
And so all of that money is making demand in the economy so much hotter than it should be.
Yep.
And at the same time, you've got all of those sorts of supply side constraints that we've had coming out of COVID, and with a lot of regulation, a lot of red tape, a lot of this, a lot of that. And so what did they expect?
Yeah.
That's how inflation occurs, where demand in an economy exceeds its capacity to supply.
Yeah.
Prices go up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's literally a very simple business, like basic, really.
Really basic.
Do you think there's a road ahead of us where we might see a settling of inflation? Do you think that's a possibility at all?
Look, I do, and certainly the inflation print yesterday was quite encouraging. So the trimmed mean, which is the real number that the Reserve Bank looks like, was 3.2%.
Okay.
The Treasurer's banging on about the headline number, which is, again, artificially depressed by the fact they're giving people power credits, and that's managed to get the number down.
Yep.
I just think, again, that's just disingenuous to say to people, oh, look over here. Guys, it's our money that you're taking off us in tax and then giving a little bit back.
Yeah.
So,
really
here's the nature of inflation, right? The stage 3 tax cuts that we got starting 1 July, the government's take of personal income tax is already above that level. So due to bracket creep, which is driven by wage inflation,
right,
the government is already taking more tax from personal income tax than it was when those tax cuts were introduced 7 months ago.
Right.
So, like, again, it's how insidious inflation is. But it leads to the point that I think the inflation outlook for Australia is normalising. And I think that all the speculation around the Reserve Bank beginning a rate-cutting cycle points to that as well.
Yep.
So relief is on the way in one sense, but does it make up for the damage that's been done in the last 2.5 years? It doesn't. So we've had a per capita, i.e. per person in Australia, recession for more than 2 years.
Yeah.
So the one thing that's held the headline economic numbers up is this uncontrolled surge in migration. So if you think about it, we've had more than the population of Adelaide arrive in Australia since Albanese was elected.
Right.
And by the way, their budgeted numbers were just over half of that. So they budgeted for, I think, about 600,000 arrivals. We're well over 1 million.
Okay.
So, again, I just can't control the border, right?
Yeah.
So we've got this massive surge in migration at the same time that housing approvals are at an 11-year low. And then we wonder why we've got a housing crisis.
Yeah.
And why we've got an inflation crisis with rents going through the roof. It's because there's too many people chasing not enough houses, and it's actually the Prime Minister's fault.
So is there a resolution there? I mean, you can't just snap your fingers and have more houses, or snap your fingers and get rid of people.
You can't, but what I think we can do is take pretty decisive action. So we've been clear as a coalition that if Dutton's Prime Minister, we'll take a number of immediate steps.
Yeah.
We'll immediately introduce a 2-year ban on foreign investors buying housing, like residential housing in Australia.
Huge.
Yeah. We'll reduce the migration intake by 25%. So permanent migration immediately cut by 25%. And that's going to mean some tough decisions.
Yeah.
There will be people who are adversely impacted by that. And, they won't be able to get their families here as soon as they'd like and all that sort of thing. But we think that's in the national interest. So that'll do something to sort of cool this overwhelming demand problem that we have.
Yep.
At the same time, how do you deal with the supply side? And so we've announced a $5 billion fund with 1/3 of it quarantined for regional Australia so that money comes to places like Forrest to pay for the infrastructure that enables basically farmland to be converted and developed into housing lots.
Okay.
So right here in the southwest, whether it's the other side of Forrest Highway at Treendale, all the way down through to Margs, there is prime development land that is being held up because infrastructure, like everything else, has gone through the roof. So for instance, in Boyanup and Capel, the deep sewer is only on one side of the river. Now, on the other side, there's heaps of land cleared, zoned, ready for development, but it needs deep sewerage to be approved, right?
Right.
So this infrastructure fund would pay for that sewer cost. And that means that the developer can then get that land to market at a reasonable price in a timeline.
Yeah.
And we've also said that unless you get it to market in that term of government, we're going to pull the money.
Right.
So there's that really strong incentive. This is not just, cash to be splashed around. This is build that infrastructure so that you get those housing lots on the market and we get those houses built. And I think that by tackling both the supply and the demand side, we've got a really good answer.
Yeah, you can kind of adjust it a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. There's something that kind of came up then in my mind, and it's, again, one of those things, if I don't word it correctly, I'm going to sound like an absolute POS. But, I don't have a problem with people who aren't from Australia living in Australia at all. Mm-hmm. But it really feels like there's less of us. As time goes on, I really feel like, and again, I don't have a problem with it. I mean, if you ask maybe people from my dad's generation, they might have a little bit more excitable vocabulary for it. But I think there's definitely this feeling of 100%, everyone wants to come here because we're on this beautiful island that everybody wants to live on the coast, have this amazing weather, have this amazing experience and call it home. But at some point, there has to be some sort of control where we go, hey, this is also something that we really like and is ours, and we don't have to give it away as rapidly as we're giving it away.
So, I mean, you're tapping into something that I've picked up talking to a lot of locals, right? Including many, many locals who are from migrant families. So let's not forget, Australia is one of the most successful migrant nations on earth,
right,
in that we have for decades welcomed people from across the country who have come here because they believe in the idea of our country.
Yep.
And that's somewhere where you get a fair go, that there is reward for effort, that you're free to live your life and build your family, and ultimately will protect you. That's effectively the social compact that we ask people to sign up to when they come here.
Yep.
And whether you're from an Indian family, an Italian family, a Greek family, a Chinese family, we have welcomed everyone.
Yeah.
It's like the old joke, what's the difference between a POM and a 747? The 747 stops whining when it lands in Perth, So these are the sort of jokes we've long had, right? Which I think reflect our migrant character. Sausage Day is a huge thing now that we've stolen from, our Italian migrants, and so we're now into it.
Yeah.
We've welcomed those people because they see the world the way we do. Now, I suspect that a lot of people would agree with you, and I do, in that in recent times we have welcomed people to this country who actually do not believe in what Australia is and what Australia can be.
Yeah.
And so I think that we need to be very clear-eyed about who's coming to this country. And when you're seeing scenes out of Western Sydney or out of Melbourne on the news that are frankly frightening to people here, in that they do not recognise the same country.
Yeah. 100%. There are scenes happening at the moment that do not reflect what the Australian experience is.
Correct.
And that's worrying.
It is, and rightly.
And how long before that's in the street from me.
Exactly.
Like, that's the part that really gets me. It's like, if that's what's happening there's nothing stopping those guys in Western Sydney jumping on a plane, coming to Perth, driving down and going like, oh, there's a market for drugs here.
Correct.
And then what then? What do we do then? Oh, they're here now. Oh, I guess we got to deal with the problem now we're here. It's like, we're in a position where it's like, there's only a certain amount here. There's only a certain amount of undesirable characters here that, as you say, they're coming here to not reflect the same experience that we're having here in Australia, but instead take advantage of the fact that we don't have like guns and we don't have a real control on serious violence, and they can just come here and take over.
So the government of the day sets our migration policy, and they can do that in a very humane way, or they can do that in a very irresponsible way. So, for instance, when the Middle Eastern conflict that we're currently seeing, and there's a ceasefire now, which is great, but when it really kicked off between Hamas and Israel post-October 7, and let's not forget, that's where that started, right? Where Hamas terrorists butchered 1,400 young Israelis at a music festival and did the most abhorrent things. So I think we've got to be clear-eyed about that. But when that humanitarian crisis that ensued was well and truly underway, the Albanese government brought thousands of people to our country without any sort of security vetting on tourist visas.
Wow.
Now, when the previous coalition government had a situation in Syria, which was very much the same, you had a dictator unleashing chemical weapons on his own people.
Yep.
We took in huge numbers of Syrian refugees, but they were all treated with appropriate security vetting, appropriate background checks, and then issued appropriate visas.
Right.
And I think Aussies need to have confidence that the government's managing migration well, or they go, you know what, maybe we should just put up the wall. Let's not have any of them. And that's a really poor outcome because our economy depends on it. A lot of our existing sort of, Australians would want to welcome family members from overseas, and that's a good thing for our country.
Yeah.
But these guys have really made a mess of it a number of times.
Yeah.
The High Court decision where they released 150 murderers, pedophiles and rapists into the street without so much as surveillance or ankle monitoring or anything like that.
Very worrying.
Occurred because the immigration minister accepted for the very first time that there was no chance of resettling those people in a third country. Now, the coalition fought that tooth and nail through its entire time of government and said, of course there's a chance that we can relocate these people elsewhere. Yep. We do not want them in Australia. And yet a Labor immigration minister rolls over on day one, more or less, and the High Court throws 150 violent criminals into the street. Like, what do they expect was going to happen?
Yeah. And then, wait for the stories to come out, 1 to 6 months later.
Yep. We had it here in Perth where that poor grandmother, I think she was like 86 or something, violently bashed in her own home by one of those NZYQ detainees that have been released.
Yeah.
Like, there's no wonder people don't feel as safe in their houses and their streets as they should.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite a fan of Western Sydney crime from the late 70s to early 90s. Like, I really, the Nettie and Abbo and that sort of crew, I've got all the books, I've listened to all the podcasts, done all the research, and you hear of some of the initiations and the things that people would have to go through to sort of prove themselves 40, 30 years ago, and it was absolutely crazy. The one thing about crime as well is it compounds over time. The mentality of the criminal underworld and organised crime, it compounds and gets worse. I know of particular gangs in Sydney that initiation processes include stealing cars, killing people, going to jail, having an ankle bracelet to get in. And then once you're in, you start your crime life. What are we talking about? And this is in the same island that you and I are on right now, That
we want to raise families in and, see kids do well.
Hey, steal my car, but kill someone in my family, kill me. What are we doing?
Yeah.
What are we doing? You know? Because now, humanity has come so far in the past 100 years, let alone however many million years you want to think we've been here, depending on your belief system. But the idea that we have that mentality and hot running water in the same day blows my mind.
Frankly, it should.
Yeah.
Because as far as we've come, we're actually regressing in key areas.
Exactly.
And that's appalling. And I think it's a failing of governments at multiple levels. So not only is it that failure of migration, we're getting the wrong people here, but it has also been a failure of certain state governments to really manage the police force appropriately, and to have the policies and supports in place so that this sort of shit is absolutely eradicated. Instead, here we are.
I think a big thing as well, you have to understand the mentality of criminals as well, is that if there's a moment of weakness, then there's every opportunity to get complete power.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm speaking from a point of view of like, as an aspiring criminal of one part of my life, I really thought that if I can get away with this much, then you're not going to do anything.
Yeah.
You're not going to do anything at all. And the problem with that is, if that goes unchecked for a long enough amount of time, it's correct.
Yep.
You can get away with whatever you want. You get to a certain point where you're like, I have enough money and power now that I can buy people to do my bidding. And that's in the underworld of like, well, I can pay for that person to be bashed or killed. There's only a bit more money before you can pay for a politician to do your bidding. So, and I'm not saying that you're that politician, of course, but the idea is there that money does buy a certain amount, and the more money, the more amount.
Yep.
So it's like that whole, now as someone who's just like, I just want to follow the rules, I want to pay my taxes, I want to get what's owed to me as far as paying my taxes as well, which is another big deal about playing as part of the system. It's, I don't want these fucking criminals, you know, which is a fair thing to ask for.
Of course it is. Of course it is. And I mean, your point about getting your fair share of what you're paying in tax is also a real one. And I think that we owe it to Australians to remember that the money that we splash around in government actually came from them. So and this is what drives me nuts about, you know, for instance, the Albanese government's Future Made in Australia, which sounds great, right? Yeah. So that's a great little tagline, and he's really good, or they all are, at getting those little sound bites that, you know, it's pretty hard to disagree with. Same job, same pay. You go, sounds fair.
Yeah.
And it's not until you get into the detail and you understand what's going on and the impact it would have in our economy that you go, there's the trap. So the Albanese government's given $1 billion to PsiQuantum, which was ostensibly to build the first quantum computer in Brisbane.
Okay.
$1 billion that they took off hardworking tradies, mums and dads, and other ordinary Aussies. There was no open tender process. It was a very secretive sort of deal that was cooked up. The money's been promised to this company, who's now gone to the US, and they've got more money off the Biden administration to do it in Chicago. So where's all that taxpayer money going? How did the government pick them? And was that really a good use of money? Is the billions of dollars that they throw around for hydrogen projects, again, taken off hardworking Aussies and put into a technology that's not commercial, that's not proven? Is that really the role of government? You know, the explosion in the public service, so that there's now more than 100,000 public servants whose jobs are regulatory in nature, i.e. they get a clipboard and a red pen, and their job is to tell other Australians not to do something. You know, is that a good use of $15 billion a year? It's up 65% since they were elected, by the way. You know what I mean? So I just think we've got to remember where the money comes from. And every dollar should be expended with that at the front of our mind. What's your
sort of vibe on the state of AI and where it's heading at the moment?
Probably. So I'm not a tech geek, and I have to admit that right up front. So I've sort of followed the AI story in a fairly loose way. Is ChatGPT a great tool if it's used appropriately? Yes. Do I think that it's going to take all of our jobs and take over our life? No. Years ago, I read a book, and many people. It's a great book actually, and very popular. For Economics. Talking about the role of technology and value adding in changing jobs over time. And one of the things that economists have discovered is that for every job that's been displaced by technology over time, more than two have been created. So that Will our workforce change over time? It will.
Yep.
But is that a bad thing? No, it's been happening for, God knows how long now.
Yeah, it's been happening as long as humans have been evolving.
Yeah. But I do think that we need to educate people to be aware. So, for instance, if you look at BLXCK, which is the Chinese...
this is a fresh news.
New one.
Yeah.
Some journos have already done some great digging on this and asked side by side ChatGPT and BLXCK about what was Tiananmen Square. And of course, ChatGPT describes in great detail exactly what went down. The BLXCK Chinese AI says, that's outside my scope. Let's talk about something else.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? So you've got to be aware that AI is, at the end of the day, subject to programming and parameters that are set by others.
Right.
So is it a tool? Yes. Is it exciting? Yes. Should we be cautious and open to the downsides? Absolutely. Is there a role for government in that? I think there will be. Too much government too early is going to curtail development and stifle innovation and all that sort of thing. So without really having a clear policy view on what we should do, I guess that's my sense of something that I'm not fully across.
There's two questions from very similar words there. Is there a role in government for setting the parameters of AI? And is there a role for AI in government? Because I think one thing that really feels like it's on the horizon is right now, humans making decisions, good. In the future, AI making decisions might also be better.
Yeah, so taking them one after the other, is there a role for AI in government? I don't subscribe to the view that AI will make better decisions than what our elected democracy churns out. And it's not pretty sometimes, I totally get that. But I think on balance, all of those checks and balances that are developed over a couple hundred years work to deliver safe and reliable decision-making in Parliament.
Yeah.
But is there a role for AI within the machinery of government to dramatically improve the efficiency of service delivery?
For sure.
Massive.
For sure.
When I first walked into my Senate office, there was a fax machine in the corner.
Yeah.
I was like, what? This is 2020.
Yeah, what are you doing?
What is this?
Yeah.
So the first job was, I don't care where that goes, but get it out of here.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to send me a fax, I'm not talking to them because that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, who are you?
Who are you? Is that, this is 1980 again?
Yeah.
So, there's still, without that need for, a profit incentive and that drive for efficiency and innovation that you get within business, is the machinery of government fat and lazy in a lot of places? It is. Mm-hmm. So I think AI could have a role in helping streamline a lot of that.
Yep.
Is there a role for government in setting AI policy? I think, there will be.
Yeah.
I'm just not clear in my own mind yet about what that is.
Yeah.
And I think because AI is expanding and innovating and developing so quickly, we don't even know what it can do yet.
Yeah. I'm adding a new AI agent into my business almost every week.
Is that right?
Yeah. So this podcast is only possible because AI edits for me. AI then turns it into clips for me.
Yep.
Right. And then sometimes I'll even get lazy and go, can you please give me the latest trends and tell me when to post and what the caption should be in relation to the thing that I'm posting.
Yeah.
So I'm going from being the engagement specialist on my own social media, understanding my algorithm and audience, to just taking my hands off the wheel and being like, tell me. I can't do what you can do in 10 seconds. I can't do it in a week anymore.
Yeah.
So, but then what does that do? That'll then allows me to make more customer calls. That then allows me to go like, what sort of campaign should I run next? And then you go, I'm going to run an email campaign. There's I forget what it's called. There's a new AI now that does your essentially all of your marketing campaign strategy and then also executes that. So that we then go, all right, I'm going to email my 150 business email list, right? It then makes custom emails based off whether they opened it, whether they open respond purchase, whether they're a repeat customer, whether they're a first-time customer. So I've now got 150 emails that are same on the first round. On the second round, I've got 150 different emails. On the third round, I've got 130 different emails. And and no two emails are the same. It's not like someone on round 3 is getting the same email that someone got on round 2. They're all different.
which is just incredible, right?
Brother, what are we talking about?
That's so powerful.
They're crazy. And also it's doing that in real time.
Yep.
It's doing that in real time. So then we go, all right, Jake with his little $200,000 per year business, and then in 3 years it's a $5 million business and he's still operating with 3 staff members. We then need to go like, well, if that's what one person is doing, what's a business that has, like you mentioned before, it has a HR department and a marketing department and all these departments, and now they have 20 AI agents within each department. It's like, what's capable there?
Yeah.
And I think it's a very easy answer to the question. There has to be some sort of at least oversight of what is the potential of this thing that we don't know what it is yet.
Definitely. So, I mean, I was talking to a doctor recently who was talking about, how excited she was for the role of AI in health. And I said, what do you mean by that? Because I would have thought people would be terrified at a robot, diagnosing and then offering to treat them.
Yeah.
And she said, no. I don't think there'll be a displacement of that human connection at the front line of medicine. But Bunbury Hospital still apparently uses pen and paper. So all the records are handwritten.
Yeah.
So, if we could move to a more digital AI system where whatever happens to you in hospital is sent straight away to your GP with no human involvement in that process at all, so that next time your GP sees you, you were treated for this at Bunbury Hospital, they did this and this and they found that. Yep. I can actually help that continuity of care now by doing this, this and this with you.
Right.
So, just those sorts of like amplifying effects of AI, I think, will be profound in business and across government and, in fact, in life. And is that a good... It's an exciting thing because the more value we create, the higher our standard of living will be and the more that we can do for those who are disadvantaged.
Yeah.
We've got to be clear-eyed about where all the money comes from for NDIS and other, sort of worthy social security nets. It comes from business and people doing well, creating value and getting taxed on a bit of it.
Yeah, 100%. I've had this question resonating in the back of my mind since we started. You spoke, we spoke a lot about how you got to the position that you're in right now. You mentioned that you started this sort of endeavor towards this goal in March last year.
Yep.
What is your day-to-day? Like, what does it look like for you? Obviously, is it just stuff like this flat out at the moment?
It literally is. So, I mean, whether it's sitting down to a podcast, having a mobile office, as I call them, or basically just advertising that I'm going to be at Dome Bunbury at 10 on Thursday, come on down and have a chat.
Yep.
Going through a suburb and door knocking and literally going door to door and just having a chat with people, introducing yourself, getting a sense of what they think. Some people want to chat, some people don't. Some people are at home, whatever.
Yeah.
Or going to community groups, sporting groups, just trying to meet as many people as possible and get a sense of, okay, what are you guys looking for from, the next federal government?
Yep.
Going to businesses, and there's some really cool businesses through the Southwest that are, doing some amazing stuff, and that they're just like, hey, come and have a look at this because we're pretty proud of it.
Of course.
So, honestly, no day is the same, but is it all pretty much outwardly facing, and dealing with people? Yes.
Yep.
Responding to the letters and emails and texts and whatever that I get. Absolutely. I think that's really important, right? So, and people are surprised. So, I got this email from a lady who... a lady in the Southwest. And she was like, I got your stuff in the letterbox. You're just another blah, blah, blah. Politicians are blah, blah, blah. And anyway, I thought I could probably just delete that. Or I can actually just go through and respond to, at a high level, the points that she raised. So I went through, I just sort of spelled out, well, look, this is who I am, this is why I'm running, and this is why I actually have a different view to you on those issues. By the way, I'd be more than happy to give you a call or catch up for a coffee if you'd like.
Okay.
Send. And I got this lovely email back saying, I'm voting for you, my husband's voting for you, I've told my kids to vote for you, no need to catch up, I'm just so thrilled that you replied.
A lot of people just want to be heard.
They want to be heard.
Yeah.
They want to know someone listened.
Yeah.
And is that too much to ask? No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and then the ripple effect of those things. Like the fact that she is now so engaged to go with the family, like, hey, look at this. What do you think she's doing when she goes to work?
Exactly.
Guess who wrote me back? You know? And then all of a sudden it turns into this really good thing. I think, so if you're having these conversations over and over, what are you hearing? What are people telling you? What are the things that people are actually worried about at the moment? Like obviously cost of living, blah, blah, blah. What would be something that you've been surprised about to hear on repeat?
To be honest, there's not that much that would surprise you. So it is cost of living, it is housing. And housing, as it also relates to migration, it does come up.
Yeah.
The cost of doing business, how bloody hard we make it for business owners and business leaders now to do anything.
Yeah.
That one comes up a lot when you're talking to those sorts of people. Then you sort of get into other like hot button topical issues. So whether it's live sheep or it's the wind farm.
Yep.
So I'd say, to be honest, there's actually it's self-evident, because we hear this stuff in our world.
Yeah.
You hear it from your friends, you hear it from your colleagues, you hear it down at the cricket club or whatever it is that you're tied up in. You're hearing this stuff because this is the lived experience of people in our part of the world right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. What's your plan? All goes well for you, right? You get the job. How long does the job last? 2 years?
Well, so federal election cycles aren't set.
Yeah.
So till the next federal election would be the technical answer, but no more than 3 years.
Okay.
That would be, yeah.
What happens after 3 years for you?
So I guess I would want in 3 years' time to be standing for election here with people confident that I'm for them.
Okay.
And they would want to be able to see that, I think, with your track record, whether it's the positions that you've taken or the impact that you've had on our national politics.
Yep.
I think they want to see you have that impact. And ideally, look, that'd be being part of a Dutton government and standing up and saying, we need this, this and this, and then it actually happening.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if you can't, after 3 years, point to what you've done for people, I think it's a tough ask to say, hey, vote for me again, though, because I'm a good guy.
Yeah.
Politics is not about who's a nice person.
It's about who takes action.
Yeah.
I think that's a real strong point that Trump had as well. It's like, look, I was in for 4 years, this, and this. Then you had the other guy. What'd he do?
Bang.
Bang. Yeah.
Yep.
Very interesting. So what would be all right, we've got that done. What comes next after this?
So, the funny thing is about politics, right? So if we have, let's say in 3 years' time we sit down to do another pod, the issues that we're talking about, I guarantee you won't be cost of living, housing, and wind farms. You know what I mean? So the issues will change. What shouldn't change is the values that you're bringing to them. I'm all about, those freedoms, lower taxes, more reward for effort, and a strong defence force so that we've got a safe country. Okay, great. So we'll be talking about different issues. Those values shouldn't have changed, and the ability to advocate for what matters to people in that moment, that's what they should see.
Right. All right, cool. There was something else I had for you. Oh, awkward silence. I love it. Gives me time to really soak it in,
That's right.
Yeah, I had one other thing for you, but
Is that sweat starting to appear on your brow there, mate?
That was half an hour ago. Well, I think that's a healthy place. Oh, that's what it was. We've spoken about a lot of topics that I've sort of brought up. What are your direct things that you're going to be tackling should this position become yours? What
am I standing for? I have a lot of different ways to hopefully say the same sorts of things between now and election day.
Yeah.
But I think if we talk about, so we've talked about a lot of those macro issues, right? So dealing with migration to get housing under control, dealing with energy so that we end up with cheaper and cleaner and more consistent power, which will, and I'm surprised we didn't get into it actually, as part of our platform, is nuclear power in Collie.
So we've got some big name in nuclear power coming to Collie at the end of, I think it might be today or
tonight. I think. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So Miss America,
from
a couple of years ago, who happens to be a nuclear engineer as well.
Of course.
The total package, right?
Yeah.
Is in Collie to, I guess, talk from not only a highly educated and highly experienced perspective, but to engage with locals and sort of talk to them about their concerns. in a conversation, and that's where politics goes wrong so often. We talk at people, we don't talk with people.
Okay.
So, in terms of there being nuclear power in Collie, we've been clear we want to see that. It is subject to a multi-year consultation process, not like the fast that we saw with the wind farms here. Multi-year consultation process, expert input to design the appropriate things and deal with the sorts of constraints people raise, like the availability of water. So the Collie coal-fired power stations now use a lot of water from the mines. Right. As they dewater the mines, a lot of that's used for cooling. And hypersaline discharge actually comes all the way down the hill and is discharged into the ocean near Buffalo Beach in a pipeline that was built decades ago. People don't understand that. But so this sort of stuff happens in the background, right? Yep. So we've got to work through that process with local people and help them understand, what does this mean for my community? Will I be safe? Will this mean jobs for my kids? How will you manage waste? All those sorts of things. So
we're talking about a nuclear plant in Collie?
Yep. That's exactly what we're talking about. So effectively, our plan is to, at 7 sites nationally where there are existing coal-fired power stations, replace those with nuclear plants.
Wow.
So 8 in 10 jobs at a coal-fired power station are directly transferable to a nuclear plant.
Really?
Because if you think about it, facilities maintenance, basic engineering, your boilermaker welders, your cleaning staff, your security staff, all of those sorts of things, your health and safety people, they all have the same job in any industrial facility.
Essentially, it's a production plant.
They roll across.
Yeah.
So do you introduce some new skills just to deal with the nuclear side of things? Absolutely you do. And we're not, would be pretty naive, I think, to say that, you could just get any old Joe Blow and give them the keys to the reactor.
Yeah, off you go.
But that's important for people up there to understand that this is a proposal that gives Collie a future. The average lifespan of a nuclear plant is 80 years. So this is a multi-decade job-creating opportunity that should deliver cleaner, consistent, and ultimately cheaper power, because you don't have to build a whole new distribution network at several times the scale for renewables. So if you think about a nuclear plant, you can always have it on, right? It's a bit like a coal-fired power station, always there, chugging away in the background. And those variances in both demand and production from your renewable sources like solar and wind happen around that. And that's great. So you just go up and down, bit of gas in there, great. So by 2050, our plan is for 54% of our power to come from renewables, about 8% to come from gas, just those gas peakers that turn on and off, like we've got at Kemerton, and then the balance to come from nuclear energy. And we think that is the best approach to get us to net zero by 2050 without bankrupting the country. And why is it important to people in Forrest? Well, like 7 in 10 jobs up the hill, whether you're talking about like at Worsley or in the power stations or whatever, actually are residents of the flatlands down here in the southwest. So they choose to live in Austral under Eaton and drive up the hill every day to go to work. So the bulk of that workforce currently lives in Forrest.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So, wow. Oh, so just I'm super. Can I take a piss? I got a question about this. Hey, you need to go to the toilet?
Yeah, I'll go after you. Back teeth for floating.
Yeah. Right. So, just so I understand, nuclear power, are we talking about like, what's the one, the bad thing happened back in the day?
Chernobyl.
Are we talking about Chernobyl nuclear power?
No, we're not talking about Chernobyl.
Okay.
So, and this is really important, I think, for us to level with people about, is that nuclear technology, like all technology, is not what it was in the 1960s. So, opponents of this run the scare campaign that we're going to build a Chernobyl in your backyard. And that's why at the outset we were very clear about the locations, 7 locations where there's existing coal-fired plants for economic reasons more than anything. But it also stops that ridiculous scare campaign. But because technology has moved on so much and nuclear safety is so much better than it was, 19 out of 20 of the world's most advanced economies use nuclear power or are actively building it.
Right.
Guess who the 1 out of the 20 is that doesn't use it? It's Australia.
Yeah.
So we've signed up to having nuclear-powered submarines, and we're going to park them at Garden Island off Rockingham.
Right.
So if it's safe to put in a submarine and park it next to the metropolitan area, why isn't it safe to build a facility in a town like Collie?
Right.
At the end of the day, we have confidence because the technology has changed so much that nuclear power is safe, it is reliable, it happens to be zero emissions, which obviously is important as we look to displace coal.
Yeah.
And so it's the obvious answer staring us in the face. I think we'd be mad not to pursue all of these technologies because will batteries become cheaper over time? No doubt. They already are. Are there risks with batteries that people don't want to talk about? Yeah. So, I mean, look at the house fires that have already occurred. The fact that multi-storey car parks in various parts of the world won't allow EVs into them because of the fire risk.
Right.
So, no technology is perfect, but fail-safe nuclear technology exists now. It's being pursued around the world. We've had a nuclear reactor in Sydney for decades. And people don't often know about that, but Lucas Heights is a reactor that's used to produce nuclear medicine, isotopes and other things like that.
Yep.
And we've had that for literally decades.
Interesting.
It's 15 k's from the Sydney CBD.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean?
Right there.
Yeah, it's right there.
Yep.
And we've successfully managed that as a country for all of that time.
Right.
So we are one of the most tectonically stable countries in the world. So obviously the thing that really impacted Fukushima in Japan, which is the most recent nuclear incident that people bring up.
It was an earthquake.
It's built on the rim of fire.
Yeah.
Crazy. And actually more people died in the stampede to get away from the plant than the one person who was directly attributed to dying from the actual event.
Right.
So this fear of nuclear, which is a thing. It's in our psyche because we've all seen, Chernobyl. I remember during lockdown in 2020 watching the HBO doco.
I just rewatched it because it's so good.
It's so good. It's wild.
So good. Yeah.
And so it appeals to something deep within us that this thing is terrifying.
Yeah.
And I think it's the limitless power of nuclear that
it's the unseen demon that this thing is going to peel my skin off and give me cancer in 10 years if it doesn't kill me tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's that fear.
Yeah, that's
which
right.
I think is healthy, to understand that, like, yes, there is this nasty end of the spectrum over here.
Yep.
But also, I mean, the reason why this is so obviously attractive is because we're talking about submarines that have this much nuclear ability and they're going to run for 50 years.
Correct.
Without any need of coming to resurface.
Correct. So I think, if you look around the world at the moment, places like Ontario are a great example in Canada where they use significant renewable energy. And theirs is predominantly hydro rather than solar because they've obviously got the ability to have hydropower there geographically, and nuclear. So they use a nice marriage of renewables plus nuclear, and they're paying 14 cents a kilowatt hour at the moment for their power.
Right.
Now, right here, right now, in this house, you're paying 32 to 35 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on which synergy plan you're on.
Wow.
So we're talking about power prices that are not just a bit cheaper, they're half of what we're paying right here now. Tennessee, another great example in the US, where they're paying about 16 cents a kilowatt hour.
Yep.
It is possible because we look around the world and our peers are doing this really, really well.
Yep.
If you look at countries like Germany, who under a Green left government a few years ago decided they were going to dismantle their nuclear program.
Yep.
Well, they started shutting down their nuclear program, and what backfilled it? A whole heap of Russian gas. Along comes the Ukraine invasion. They decided, we can't really buy Russian gas anymore.
Yep.
So what happens to power prices? They go through the roof.
All right. Is there a roadmap between having nuclear and our prices actually going down? Is there a connection there?
Yeah, I think that is the case, right? So if we get this right, and by right I mean we don't waste money building lots of transmission lines that we don't need for offshore wind farms,
Yep.
because those billions of dollars have to be paid for by someone. And that someone is going to be you and me as households and you and me as business owners.
Yep.
So if we get this right, we'll move in a methodical way from a grid that is dependent on coal and gas to one that ends up being renewables plus nuclear.
Yep.
That means not making crazy decisions like shutting coal-fired power stations down by a date because that date makes us feel good.
Yeah.
So if someone says to me, "Oh, we've got to shut it down. We're going to shut Collie down by 2030." So where'd you get that from?
Yeah.
Why not 2031?
Yeah.
Why not 2029?
It's a nice number.
It's a nice number.
Yeah.
Policy making should be a little bit more educated than that.
Yeah. I think also, though, I mean, there's two sides to that coin, isn't there? It's like, well, it will happen when it will happen. Well, when will it happen?
Yeah.
Give me a threshold. By creating that number, we create that safety and like, no, it's going to happen by here. And like the whole old Elon Musk thing is like, doesn't always give you 100% of what he promises, but he gives you something, you know?
It's right. And so I think where you can see a legitimate pathway informed by the best research, the best policy, the best science, then you can level with people and say, look, this is pushing the boundaries of the possible, but we think we can do it this way.
Right.
What I think is total bullshit is where politicians give you what you want to hear in terms of a target with no plan whatsoever as to how to get there.
Yeah,
so
especially
the current Albanese government's renewable energy target by 2030, way off track.
Yeah.
The 1.2 million new houses that they promised a couple of years ago, way off track.
Yeah.
It was never going to happen. And we said at the time, that's actually not possible with your policy settings. But they go, oh, no, well, we're going to have 1 million new homes.
Yeah.
You're not.
Yeah, it's kind of like a fairy tale that we're hoping for rather than a reality-based one.
Yeah.
Interesting. So what's the concept of Miss America? Obviously knows a lot about nuclear stuff as well. That's why she's here. What is that a pure educational thing for the residents? And
look, as far as I understand, it's nothing to do with the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
There's a group, I think it's called Australians for Nuclear or something or other, which formed and literally out of Australian citizens who were very keen on seeing this technology as part of the energy mix in Australia. They got together, they formed a little organisation, they did some fundraising, and they've got this star-studded sort of guest speaker tour coming, and that's how it's happened. Wow. So to me, it's great because it shows there is another side to this. It's grassroots people going, we should have this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's definitely a thing there where, I mean, as I outlined before, if there's this particular process that doesn't require 24 trucks going up and down the hill every 24 hours. It doesn't require a train line to be constantly pulling backwards and forwards, and it's also, in this area and the output is not free power, but, as close to as possible, then we probably should explore that avenue.
Exactly.
Yeah. I actually saw that advertised on Facebook maybe a month ago and I was like, there's a good podcast guest.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is the thing, right? Now with Matt, I'll try and funnel some really interesting people your way because the great thing about politics is you get to deal with these sorts of interesting and engaging problems every day and meet just the most amazing people. So yeah, definitely. I guess circling back to where we started off on this journey is what I'm advocating for locally. And there's a couple other key things that I think I would like to sort of talk about briefly. I think the Busselton Airport needs a massive terminal upgrade. It's currently little more than a shack.
Yeah. What do you mean?
No, it's atrocious.
It's wild getting on the plane in Melbourne. Like, I love the Busselton to Melbourne line. I think it's the best thing to happen since Bunbury, since I've been here. Yep. Being able to drive half an hour down the road, 5 hours later, you're in Melbourne. But then the bizarre, contradictory or juxtaposed thing of getting on in Melbourne and getting off in Busselton, and you're walking on the tarmac, you're like, what the fuck is this? Double the amount of standard wouldn't be enough to match what you're getting on in Melbourne,
Exactly. So there's like 250,000 passengers through there a year now. Yep. There's 5,000 FIFO families that live in the southwest that are all using that to go directly to site. They're earning billions of dollars in iron ore royalties for the state government, which is all being spent in Perth on Metronet. Like, I think that's atrocious, right? So it's about a $70 million project to upgrade it to a terminal that is fit for international flights. And Busselton Airport's plan is in 2028 to have direct international flights into Busso.
Wow.
So Busselton Jetty already, about 55% of their visitors a year come from Singapore and Malaysia. imagine the potential for tourism and hospitality to explode in the southwest if we had direct flights from Asia. Not to mention how cool it would be for us to go up there.
Huge.
And never mind what happens in the top of the plane, it's all the opportunity in the bottom of the plane for premium produce to go direct to Asia. So imagine our abalone, our marron, our prime cuts of beef, our truffles, all of that direct to Asia and direct to premium markets, so that those businesses earn shitloads of money and can reinvest and grow, and it just helps lift us all up and actually diversify our economy away from mining, which we always talk about, but no one ever does much about. So that sort of economic investment, I'm really keen to see the federal government step up there and push the state government, because I think the state government neglects this region. And the other thing that I think we can do a great deal of good by investing in is local sport.
Okay.
So as we talked about before, there is this declining social cohesion that we're seeing in parts of our community, particularly over east. I think sporting clubs provide the best vaccine for that because they take young, impressionable people, they teach them discipline, teamwork, leadership, a bit of resilience, and they then have a mechanism to coach people through life a bit.
100%.
So if you're being a shithead, it's the footy coach that slaps you around the back of the head and says, I'm dropping you this week, mate.
Yeah.
That's how you learn.
Yeah.
And it's not through the justice system or anything like that. That's how you learn to be a decent Aussie. So I think that, we should have facilities that allow girls and women to play footy at South Bunbury. We should have the sorts of facilities that make it possible for those community groups to come together and do what they do best.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think the secondary integrity sort of lesson, you have your parents, and then the next thing is 100% sport. School, so, you know what I mean? Like if you're someone like me, I'm reasonably on a path of success. I basically failed most of school. So I don't really think schooling is a huge thing. The education system is a whole different conversation. But the importance that sport and sporting plays as an integrity-based learning process is so significant. So much so that I'm not sure if you know, but up until 18, I was an inline speed skater. I turned professional.
I didn't know that.
Lived in Europe for a year, was on multiple teams.
Oh, wow.
Top 10 in the world. And no big deal, but washed up speed skater nowadays. But
mate, I can't run, throw, kick or catch, so I'm insanely jealous.
It's the amount of stuff that has directly correlated from being an athlete to being in business and, having this aspiration to be some sort of social leader. I can tie most of that back to the lessons that I learned in being an athlete.
Yeah.
And, I despise football. I really do. I do not care for the game. I have a friend who's so deeply in football, it's annoying. And just the amount of camaraderie and the amount of discipline that he has in his life, not even playing the game at a competitive level, but belonging to something and having something to do on Saturday morning and on Tuesday night and on Thursday. And it's such and such's birthday. I don't really like him, but he's on our team, so we do the thing, And it's like the importance that stuff has for me is someone you'll see people that are a little bit lost. It's like you find out they didn't have a dad in their life and they didn't have a sport to belong to. You're like,
Wonder how the wheels fell off.
Wow.
And, the other thing it really does is promote volunteerism, and I'm a big believer in it. So, my volunteering was more emergency services. I did volunteer marine rescue first and then ambulance for 10 years.
Okay.
But club environments promote that because this idea you've got to give back. You've got to give up your time to coach a junior team, or you've got to be a line umpire, or you've got to, wait behind the bar for a function on a Friday. You've got to do something to give back to what you're part of.
Yeah, the sausage sizzle at Bunnings.
Yeah, all that
Saturday
sort of stuff.
Morning, dude.
It's what matters. So I think that as we look at mental health problems exploding in Australia, and it's married to the decline in both club-based membership and volunteerism.
Yeah,
I think there's something in that. So, I'm pushing really hard for a couple of key sporting projects through the Southwest to be funded.
Yeah.
There's this insane demand for those sorts of projects. Everyone wants a 50-metre pool. Everyone wants this. Everyone wants that.
Yeah.
Can't do it all. But, I think where we can see real ability to unlock something of value to a community, I'm all about it.
I think there's also a hunger there for... I don't even know the age group, but I know the pendulum has swung as far as there are kids now that are, that age group between like 12 and 18, and they're not on social media because they just know that that is unhealthy, that is bad. I don't want to be going home and teased about a photo I posted or not being a part. So they just don't want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And I think the weird thing that has happened in that journey of going like, oh, push back, pendulum swing, they're kind of like, well, what do I do after school? Like there's not this thing that's taken up all my time. And if you rewind, 20 years for our generation, it was like, you didn't have time to think about what you were doing after school. You were doing this on Monday. You had that on Tuesday and Wednesday. You were, So I think there is that hunger there. And I think also like on top of having that thing to do, there's those 1 million tiny interactions you have doing these things.
Mm-hmm.
Like much like yourself, I'm very engaged with the community. I'm constantly meeting business owners, people that I already know and new people that I don't know. I've got my social skate. I've got, young people in business. I've got church. I've got all these things that I'm going and having all these micro interactions with that are continuously building this character. The foundation of that character was having my first girlfriend at skating. It was having my first time where I was almost about to become a national champion and I fell on the last corner. All these character building moments that you get from the experience of doing something, that something typically is a sport.
And then you pop out the other end as a functional adult, capable of pursuing your dreams, taking a hard knock and getting on with it.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think is irreplaceable.
Yeah.
You just, if it is replaceable with something else, we haven't worked it out because it's not happening now.
Yeah, no, for sure. That character building, all those micro interactions, if there's a way of downloading them without having to feel like a dickhead over and over and over, I would love to take that pill.
Not everyone wins a prize.
Yeah.
Like I think, and schools have really made a mess of this in a way because now, everyone gets a prize for everything. You can't get your work crossed. So I believe in this state now, and I haven't fact-checked
Brother,
this.
what?
You can't. The teacher's not allowed to cross it or mark in red anymore because that's aggressive. 2 plus 2 does not equal 5, Johnny. Try again. It drives me nuts.
Yeah. That's well, actually, I thought I'd avoid it for the sake of not having a sticky conversation, but I feel really robbed by the education system. Right? I'm 32 years old. I was born in 1992. I was a perfect candidate for, and you were probably this as well, you grew up without technology and then halfway through you got given it, and now you've got these kids that are doing, ATAR results with ChatGPT. So it's like, it's a really interesting thing. I had this moment in my school life, I might have been somewhere at the beginning of secondary school, and I was like, what are we doing here? Like, what are we actually doing? Because, the easy thing to say is like, I'm never going to use algebra in real life. I don't know any adult that actually uses algebra in real life. The truth is you do use algebra in real life, but the point that I was making is we seem to be learning things that are uncontextual to the adult life. And it's like, well, this is preparing you for when you get there. The only thing you're really preparing me for is to be at work on time, to eat when I'm told when to eat, and to go home and take my work home and keep doing it.
So, look, I think if you're a literate and numerate adult by the time that you finish your schooling, it's done its job.
Right.
School isn't best for all kids, we know that. And I see a real lost opportunity in the way that as a society we are increasingly telling young people, you've got to go to uni or you're a failure.
Yeah.
Not everyone should go to uni. Not all smart people should go to uni. University has a particular role and it should stick to that. And as a society, we shouldn't be telling kids that it's a bad thing to leave school and get an apprenticeship or, to pursue some sort of VET and on your way with a traineeship. Like, we should be telling kids that's a great way to get started in life because it means that, by the time that your peers have racked up, $50,000 or $100,000 in HECS debt, and been living on meagering for a couple of years, you're out earning a decent wage and maybe even bought a little van and starting your own electrician business.
100%.
So we're just sending the wrong message with this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think there's a role, not so much in policy, but just in the posture that we take as adults around the place in saying to young people, hey,
I think it's that environment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because one big thing I found in the past 5 years of what you see now is I'm hugely fucking artistic and creative, and it's great. And people look at me as that person. But I wasted 4 years driving road trains thinking that I should do what my dad did because that's what society says is kind of what you do. Yeah. Don't veer too much from the path that has already been created for you. And the amount of things that I look back on in school that I'll be like, I was screaming for someone to say, go do that. If you enjoy doing that, go do that. And if you do that long enough and you do it well enough, regardless of what it is, maybe this doesn't apply to 1% of things, but regardless of what it is, you'll find a way to monetize it. Yeah. Or industry will find you and say, you're valuable in this thing, let me do it. Like I have a crazy weird fascination for digging perfectly circular holes. I am so good at digging perfectly circular holes to a point where I blow your mind with how perfectly straight it can go down for as long as possible with just a normal shovel. Now, I now know, without doubt, that had I done that year after year after year, I'd probably be on $200,000 to do that by now. That's the way the industry works. But for some reason, it was this, you're not smart enough to go to uni, so all of a sudden, where you're at 100, you're now at 50, right? And if you don't want to be an electrician, plumber, boilermaker, something along those lines, now you're down at 20, right? But for some reason, all of these high-achieving, company-owning, bad motherfuckers are all in the same boat as me, where they're just like, no, none of that had any significance to me at all. It's only when I stared directly into the sun and started chewing glass and going like, well, I'm just going to take the hard route, did they start figuring things out. And that's why I look back now and I see, like I've got particular, friends of mine that have younger brothers and sisters where I'm sitting them down, I'm like, what do you like doing?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. You do know. It's the thing that when you're doing it, you're like, this is fun and I could do this forever. Figure out what that is. Spend the next 3 years figuring out what that is. Do as many things as possible. Go play volleyball. Go volunteer. Go try this sport. Go to another country and live for 6 months. See if you can just find something and then just do it over and over and over until someone goes, I'm going to pay you to do it.
And then in 5 years' time, if it's not lighting you up each day, do something different.
Even better. Now you know that it's not that's not it either.
Quitting your job, honestly, everyone should do it. Because it just enables you to throw those shackles off and go, actually, I can do something different.
For sure.
Now, mate, unfortunately, that was my phone yelling at me saying I've got to go.
You got to do a thing?
I've got to do a thing.
That's all right. Is there anything right now?
I didn't think there was a way that we were going to fill up almost 2.5 hours with chat, by the way. So, credit to you, mate. This has been easy.
Confidently,
just
dude.
Spinning yards.
Yeah, spinning yards indeed. So is there anything that you would like to promote right now in these final moments?
Look, I think if anyone's even got half an open mind towards supporting me at the election, please get in touch. I'd love to have a chat or an email or a text or whatever it is, because I owe it to people to be upfront and engage with them. Yep. I'm asking for their vote, and so that's my part of the deal.
Very cool. I'm going to put all of your contact information below in the thing. They'll be able to find you. This has been the first official podcast at our permanent podcast studio setup table as well. So congratulations on being number one.
Here for the christening. How good.
Yeah. You also got the first podcast, me post cutting off 2 meters of hair, would you believe? I used to have a... Yeah.
Wow, hey.
Yeah, very
It has been hot.
Oh, yeah, I like it. I was looking in the mirror before, I'm like, I'm fucking ready, Rightio, well, that is it. Everyone be good to your mum because we are fucking out.